There are some lives that seem perfect from the outside, like the kind of life that others dream about. And then there are lives that, no matter how perfect they might look, are built on something more fragile than anyone realizes. For most of his life, the boy had everything anyone could want. He lived in a mansion with tall, elegant walls, sweeping staircases, and rooms filled with more luxury than he knew how to enjoy. His world was made of private cars, the best schools, and shiny clothes that made him look like he belonged to a different universe than most people. He lived a life that many would envy, always surrounded by friends who were as rich as he was, all of them indulging in the latest trends and newest toys. He was the kind of boy who thought everything was his to have just because it was his world. There was no sense of effort in anything. Things just came to him, and if someone tried to point out that life wasn't all about wealth, he would roll his eyes. What was the point of struggle when you could just enjoy the ride? This boy, though, didn't understand the true value of what he had. How easy it was for him to walk into a store and buy anything. How simple it was for him to say, "I'll take that," and have it handed to him. But there was one thing that he didn't have. One thing that all the money and luxury couldn't buy. A deep, true connection with anyone, especially with the man who had given him everything. His father. His father was different. His father didn't live in the world of luxury, where everything was easily bought and sold. He was a mechanic, someone who spent his days working with his hands, fixing old cars that others had left behind. There was nothing glamorous about it. His father's world was filled with dirt under his nails, sweat on his brow, and hours that stretched long into the night just to make sure that the bills were paid and that the house stayed warm. Despite his hard work, he never complained. The pride he had came not from the things he owned, but from the effort he put in to make sure his son was taken care of. He worked hard because he wanted Lucas to have a better life than he had. He wanted his son to grow up with opportunities, with education, with all the things that could help him escape the tough, often unkind realities of the world he knew so well. But Lucas didn't see it that way. To him, his father's work was just a reminder of how different their worlds were. His father was always tired, always busy, always talking about hard work and sacrifices, while Lucas just wanted to enjoy his life, free of responsibilities. At dinner, they would sit across from each other, the space between them filled with silence. Jack, the father, would ask about Lucas's day, but Lucas would shrug, not really caring to share. After all, who cared about his father's questions when he had friends waiting for him or a party to attend? The few times they did talk, it was usually filled with awkward pauses and uncomfortable glances. Jack tried to bridge the gap, but it seemed like every time he tried, Lucas pulled further away. There was no real connection. To Lucas, his father was just someone who worked hard to give him everything. But that was where the story ended. And it wasn't just the father that Lucas distanced himself from, it was the whole idea of anything less than what he had. He couldn't imagine living the life his father had, spending hours fixing cars and getting his hands dirty. The thought of it seemed so beneath him. He would often joke with his friends about it, pretending to be a little embarrassed by his father's job, making light of the whole thing. After all, what did a kid like Lucas have to learn from someone like that? One day after school, Lucas and a few of his friends were hanging out at the mall, laughing and talking about the latest movies. They passed by a small shop that sold old vintage motorcycles, just the kind of thing his father would be interested in. His friends laughed and joked about how people who worked with their hands must be stuck in the past, always obsessed with fixing things that were already broken. They laughed even harder when Lucas half-jokingly said, "Yeah, my dad would probably be interested in that." Lucas was the king of his world. At least, that's how he thought of himself. Everything he said, every move he made seemed to command attention. And in that moment, with his friends laughing at his joke, he felt like the world was his to control. But deep down, there was a tiny voice, barely audible, that reminded him of something he couldn't shake. A sense of guilt. He loved his dad, but he wasn't sure how to show it. Lucas wasn't one to express emotions easily, especially when it came to his father. He had never really known how to connect with him, how to say thank you for all the things Jack had done. Maybe because Lucas didn't know if he had ever truly understood what those things meant. But everything changed the night the storm came. It wasn't a storm that could be predicted by any weather forecast. It wasn't a rainstorm or a snowstorm, but a storm in Lucas's life that shook everything he had ever known. That night, Lucas made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. It started with a phone call. Lucas had been invited to a party that promised fun, music, and all the things he loved. His friends were excited, and so was he. He was ready to go, to slip into his world of ease and comfort, forgetting about anything that didn't seem exciting or worthwhile. He told his father that he was going out, just like any other night. He didn't think twice about it. Jack nodded like he always did, his face lined with exhaustion but still caring, still there. He always seemed to care. But that night, as Lucas raced down the road in his car, the world outside felt like a blur. He didn't think about the risks, the dangers, or even his father's warnings. His mind was only on the thrill of the night, on the idea that nothing could touch him. The road was dark and the wind was strong, but Lucas was speeding down it, feeling invincible. Then everything changed in an instant. The car spun out of control, veering off the road, swerving toward the edge of a cliff. Lucas's heart skipped a beat, and before he could fully comprehend what was happening, the car was teetering dangerously close to the edge. The ground beneath him seemed to give way, and for the first time, Lucas understood what it meant to be helpless. His breath came in sharp gasps, panic rising in his chest. His life was hanging by a thread, and the world around him seemed to slow down. In that moment of chaos, a single thought crossed his mind. His father. Had he made the right choice? Was this the end? Was it too late for anything to matter? And then, as the car hung in the balance, something else happened. A sound. A voice strong and sure shouting in the distance. It was his father. Jack Lucas couldn't see him yet, but the voice was unmistakable. And in that instant, the boy realized something. There was someone out there who loved him, someone who would stop at nothing to make sure he was safe. It wasn't his friends, it wasn't the wealth, and it wasn't the luxury he had always taken for granted. It was his father, and Lucas, though terrified, felt something deep inside him, an understanding that he had never felt before. That night, Lucas's life would change forever. The crash was louder than anything Lucas had ever heard. The screech of metal against asphalt, the thud of tires bouncing off the road. It all happened in what felt like a single, endless moment. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The car spun out of control, heading straight for the edge of the cliff. Lucas's heart raced in panic, his grip tight on the steering wheel, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. It was as if the world itself had conspired to make sure this was the moment he would never forget. And then, as quickly as it had started, the car came to a stop, teetering at the very edge of the cliff, with nothing but a drop below. The engine sputtered, and for a moment everything was silent. The headlights of the car cut through the darkness, illuminating the black emptiness ahead. Lucas's breath came in shallow gasps, his heart still pounding in his chest. He was trapped. The car wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. For a long second, Lucas couldn't move. He just stared at the edge, unable to process what was happening. How had things gone so wrong? One moment he was racing down the road, feeling invincible, and the next his life was hanging by a thread. He could feel the car slowly shifting, as if it was testing the limits of how much longer it could hold on. His mind raced, but there was nothing he could do. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't ready for this kind of danger. Then he heard a sound, a voice distant but unmistakable. It was his father's voice. "Lucas, Lucas!" The words cut through the panic in his mind like a lifeline thrown to someone who was drowning. At first, Lucas didn't believe it. How could his father be here? His heart sank as he realized just how close he was to death. His father, who had always been there, watching from the sidelines, trying to protect him, trying to guide him, was now a voice in the darkness calling out to him. Lucas felt a mix of fear and guilt, like a punch to his stomach. How could he have been so reckless? How could he have taken this road, this dangerous road, without thinking about the consequences? His mind spun as the car shifted again, just a little too much. Lucas's hands went limp on the wheel, his whole body frozen with fear. He looked out the window, down at the black abyss below, feeling the weight of his situation press down on him. He thought about his life, about the people he had taken for granted. He thought about his friends who would never know what had just happened, and about his father, who had always been there, working so hard to give him a better life. He thought about how he had never really appreciated what his father had done for him, never truly understood the sacrifices he had made. He had taken it all for granted, just like he had taken his life for granted. Suddenly, he snapped out of his thoughts. The car jolted again, and this time it felt like it might actually slip over the edge. Panic surged through Lucas, and he slammed his hands onto the steering wheel, trying to hold on. But it wasn't enough. The car groaned, and Lucas could feel the ground shifting beneath him. His heart raced, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood the meaning of fear. It wasn't the fear of failing a test or not getting the latest gadget. It was the fear of losing everything, of never getting the chance to fix the mistakes you had made. Just as he was about to scream to do anything, the car stopped moving. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting. There was a deafening silence, and Lucas's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. Was he going to die? Was this the end? He closed his eyes for a second, wishing that he could somehow turn back time, make a different choice, take a different road. But that wasn't possible. The only thing that was possible was what happened next. Lucas heard footsteps coming closer and closer. His heart leapt. He wasn't alone. His father's voice had been a signal, a call to action. Jack was here. Somehow, despite everything, Jack had come. How had he gotten here? Wasn't he at home? Wasn't he working? Lucas didn't know, and at that moment it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that his father was here, and he wasn't going to let him fall. Through the window, Lucas could see him now. His father, Jack, running toward the car, his face illuminated by the headlights. Jack's eyes were wide with fear, but there was also something else there. Something fierce, determination, and love. In that moment, Lucas realized just how much his father had cared about him, how much he was willing to risk to save him. He realized that all the times he had dismissed his father, all the times he had rolled his eyes at him, all the times he had taken his father's love for granted, none of that mattered now. What mattered was that his father was here, willing to risk everything to pull him out of this mess. Lucas! Jack's voice rang out, louder now, closer. Hold on, son, hold on. Lucas tried to say something, tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His mouth was dry and his heart felt like it was about to burst from his chest. He was stuck. He couldn't move. He didn't know what to do. But then suddenly his father was there at the window reaching for him. Come on, son. I've got you. Jack's voice was calm, but there was a rawness to it, a desperation. Lucas didn't know how he had gotten here, didn't know how his father had found him in this moment of terror. But in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that his father was here, and he was going to pull him out. Jack grabbed hold of the door, pulling with all his strength. I need you to move, Lucas, just a little. Lucas's hands shook as he reached for the door handle, but his fingers were numb with fear. His father was pulling with all his might, but the car was so close to the edge. It was so unstable. The ground beneath them was slipping, crumbling away. Lucas didn't know how much time they had left. Lucas, listen to me. Jack's voice cut through the panic. You have to trust me. You have to trust that I won't let you go. And in that moment, Lucas understood. He had never really understood before, not fully, not in the way he did now. His father wasn't just a man who worked long hours in a garage. He wasn't just the one who gave him money or bought him the latest gadgets. His father was the one who had always been there, when no one else was, when no one else cared, when no one else was willing to give everything just to see him safe. With his father's help, Lucas managed to open the door just enough to crawl out. The car shifted again, and for a moment, Lucas thought he might fall, but his father was there, pulling him out with all his strength, holding him tight as they stumbled backward, away from the edge. They collapsed onto the ground, both of them breathing heavily, their bodies shaking with adrenaline and relief. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They just sat there side by side, catching their breath. Finally, Jack spoke. You okay, son? Lucas couldn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if he was okay. He wasn't sure if anything would ever be the same again. But one thing was clear, his life had changed. His father had saved him, and in doing so had shown him a kind of love that Lucas had never truly understood before. Yeah, Lucas finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah, I'm okay. But in the depths of his heart, Lucas knew that he was more than just okay. He was alive, and he owed that to the man who had never given up on him, no matter how far he had pushed him away. It was a moment that would change everything. The minutes after the rescue were silent. The only sound was the harsh breathing of both Lucas and his father, their lungs still catching up with the chaos they had just escaped. Lucas felt the cold night air on his skin, but it didn't register. Everything seemed numb, like his body hadn't fully caught up with his mind yet. He was alive, he knew that much. But the truth of what had just happened and what it meant wasn't fully sinking in. He had been this close to losing everything. His father sat next to him on the cold ground, his arm around Lucas's shoulders, pulling him close. Jack's hands were shaking, but it wasn't just from the cold. Lucas could feel the tension, the relief, the exhaustion in his father's grip. He didn't say anything at first. Words felt unnecessary, maybe even impossible. There was so much that needed to be said, but neither of them seemed to know how to start. The air felt thick, like there was something heavy between them that had always been there but was never addressed. Lucas knew deep down that everything had changed. The boy who had once thought of his father's life as nothing but an inconvenience, something to be embarrassed about, was beginning to understand what it really meant to be loved, what it meant to be cared for by someone who would fight for you no matter what. For so long, Lucas had taken everything for granted, the wealth, the status, the easy road he had been handed. He had always believed that his world was the right one, that the way he lived, driven by money, social status, and luxury, was the way everyone should want to live. But now as he sat there trying to breathe, he was coming to realize that none of that mattered. The fancy cars, the parties, the designer clothes, it all seemed so hollow. What good was any of it if it couldn't save you when you needed it most? "Are you sure you're okay?" Jack asked again, his voice still soft, but the concern in it was clear. His father had always asked him this every time Lucas came home from a school or a game or anything that could have been dangerous. But now, in this moment, the question didn't feel like just a casual inquiry. It felt like something deeper, something that only a father who had almost lost his son would ask. Lucas nodded, but he didn't know if he meant it. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I think so." But the truth was he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. They sat together for a long while, watching the stars above them. It was strange, Lucas thought, how calming the quiet could be after all the chaos. There was something peaceful about the night sky, the way the stars shone so bright despite everything that had happened. He had never really paid attention to the stars before. They had always been just something in the sky, something he'd seen out of the window of a car or from the comfort of his room. But now, sitting next to his father, they seemed meaningful, almost like they were a reminder of something important, something that had always been there, just waiting for him to see it. "Dad," Lucas began, his voice unsteady. I don't know what I was thinking." The words felt heavy, like they had been stuck in his chest for a long time. "I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to drive like that. I didn't think about the risks. I didn't think about you or Mom or anything. I was just trying to show off, I guess." Jack didn't say anything at first, but his grip on Lucas's shoulder tightened slightly, like he was offering comfort without words. After a long silence, Jack spoke, his voice low but steady. "You're a kid, Lucas. You make mistakes. We all do. But it's what we do after the mistake that matters. You're lucky, son. Lucky you're still here. And you know I'm not just talking about luck. I'm talking about the fact that you've got a second chance. You've got time to change." Lucas's mind was still racing, but now there was a part of him that felt something new, something that he had never really felt before. It was like a crack in the wall he had built around himself, a tiny shift in his perspective that he couldn't ignore. He realized for the first time that his father wasn't just saying these things because he was trying to make him feel better. He was saying them because he believed in him, because he had always believed in him, even when Lucas hadn't. The next morning, when they arrived back at the house, things were different. Not in any obvious way, but in the way the air felt between them. There was a subtle shift, a quiet understanding that had never existed before. It was as if Lucas had been given a new lens through which to see the world, and for the first time he didn't feel so detached from it all. He looked around at the house, the same house he had always taken for granted, and something clicked in his mind. He saw it for what it was, not a symbol of status, not a prize for a life well lived, but a home. A place that had been built by his father's hard work, a place where love had been put above everything else. Lucas couldn't help but think about his own life, the choices he had made, the way he had treated the people who loved him most. He had always assumed that because he had everything, he could get by without putting in any real effort. He had treated his father like an accessory in his life, someone who was there when he needed something, but someone to be ignored when things were going well. But now that seemed so wrong. The things Lucas had taken for granted, his father's love, his sacrifice, the quiet, steady work that built their life, suddenly meant more than anything. Later that day, Lucas found himself in the garage, standing in front of the old car his father had been working on for weeks. It was a rusty, beat-up thing, the kind of car most people would have sold for parts or just let go to waste. But to Jack, it was more than just a car. It was something he had fixed, something he had poured his heart into. It was a symbol of his own work ethic, his own determination. And now, Lucas found himself staring at it, wondering why he had never taken the time to understand what it meant. Jack was working on the car when Lucas approached him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching his father move, his hands covered in grease. He had seen his father do this 1,000 times before, but now it was different. Now he saw the dedication, the patience, the love that went into each turn of the wrench. He had never appreciated it before, never understood it. But now he did. "Can I help?" Lucas asked, his voice quiet. Jack looked up, a little surprised. "You want to help?" "I think so," Lucas said, taking a step closer. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but something inside him told him that this was important. "I want to learn." For the first time, Jack smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Well, all right then. Let's get to work." The hours passed slowly, but for the first time, Lucas didn't mind. They worked side by side, his father teaching him how to fix the car, how to pay attention to the smallest details. Lucas wasn't great at it, and he made mistakes, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the time they spent together. The way Jack patiently showed him how to turn the wrench, how to assess the engine, how to find the solution to a problem. And in those hours, Lucas realized something else. It wasn't about the car. It wasn't about the work or the money or any of the things that had once consumed him. It was about the connection, the bond that had been there all along, but one that he had been too blind to see. His father hadn't just worked to give him things. He had worked to build a life, a family, a future. And that was the thing that Lucas had never truly appreciated. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the garage, Lucas sat back on the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. He felt different, lighter, like something had shifted inside him. He wasn't the same boy who had crashed his car the night before. He wasn't the same boy who had taken everything for granted. The boy sitting on the workbench was someone who was beginning to understand that true strength didn't come from wealth or status. It came from hard work, love, and the people who never gave up on you, no matter what. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt truly grateful for his father, for the second chance he had been given, and for the realization that, maybe, he wasn't as lost as he had once thought. Weeks passed since that night on the cliff, but the memories were still fresh in Lucas's mind. Every time he looked at his father, every time Jack smiled or gave him a nod of encouragement, something inside Lucas seemed to shift. It was like he was waking up from a long, deep sleep, seeing the world around him for the first time, not with the arrogance or indifference he once had, but with a new sense of appreciation. It wasn't easy. Change never was. There were days when Lucas caught himself slipping back into old habits, when the pressures of school or social life tempted him to fall back into the comfortable but hollow routine he had lived before. But then just as quickly he would remember that night. He would remember the fear in his father's eyes, the sound of his voice, and how in the end, it had been his father's love that had pulled him back from the brink. That reminder was enough to keep him moving forward. The first real test of Lucas's change came one afternoon, a week after they had worked together in the garage. It was a Saturday, and Jack had asked him to come along for a trip to the local hardware store. Jack had been working on a small project at home, fixing up an old shed that had been falling apart. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important. And as always, Jack didn't hesitate to ask Lucas if he wanted to join. At first, Lucas almost said no. It wasn't the kind of thing he had ever been interested in. It was hard to admit, but he had always felt a bit embarrassed about how his father spent his days. It was blue-collar work, hard, honest work, the kind of work people didn't always notice. Lucas had been too caught up in his own world to appreciate what it really meant. But today, something was different. Instead of brushing off his father's invitation, Lucas found himself standing in the doorway of the house, looking at Jack's old truck parked in the driveway. It was a simple truck, nothing flashy, nothing to brag about. Just an old vehicle that had been patched up over the years like so many things in their life. But today, Lucas saw it differently. He saw it for what it was, something reliable, something that had been with them through thick and thin. I'll come with you, Lucas said before he could second-guess himself. Jack looked at him for a moment, his expression softening. You sure? Yeah, Lucas nodded. I want to help. Jack didn't say anything at first, but Lucas could see the warmth in his eyes. Without another word, they climbed into the truck and the two of them drove to the store. As they pulled out of the driveway, Lucas felt something in his chest tighten, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else, something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. It was a quiet sense of purpose. The drive to the store was simple. They didn't talk much. There didn't seem to be a need for words. It was comfortable in a way that it had never been before. For once, Lucas wasn't trying to impress anyone, and Jack wasn't pushing him to be anything he wasn't. They just drove, side by side, two people who had been through something that changed them both, even if they hadn't fully understood it yet. At the store, they walked down the aisles gathering tools and supplies. Lucas had no idea what any of it was for, but that didn't matter. He was just happy to be there with his father. And as they went from shelf to shelf, Lucas noticed how his father moved, how he picked out exactly what was needed, how he measured things in his head before grabbing them from the shelves. Jack's knowledge of the world around him was vast and practical, and it was clear that he had learned it all through years of hands-on work. There was no hesitation in his movements, no second-guessing. He knew exactly what he was doing. You know, Jack said after a while, breaking the silence, this shed's been here for years. It's like this old house of ours. Things fall apart, but you just fix them up and keep going. That's what life is, really. Fixing things when they break. Lucas looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his father's words. It wasn't a lecture or some deep wisdom that felt out of place. It was just a simple truth, spoken quietly as they stood there in the aisle, surrounded by rows of screws and bolts. I never thought about it like that, Lucas said, his voice thoughtful. He had always seen life as something to be conquered, something to be climbed. He had never considered it as something you had to maintain, something you had to fix and rebuild constantly. It's the little things that matter, Jack continued. Like this shed. It may not look like much, but if I don't fix it now, it's going to fall apart completely. And when that happens, everything else starts to fall apart too. You can't take anything for granted, not the things you have, not the people in your life. If you don't keep working at it, it'll all just slip away. Lucas nodded, absorbing his father's words. They weren't the kind of words he was used to hearing. It wasn't the live your dream speech or the follow your heart kind of advice that he had heard from other people. It was real. It was grounded in the truth of everyday life, the kind of life Jack had built with his own two hands, without the need for anyone's approval. When they finished at the store, they loaded up the truck with their purchases and drove home. By the time they got back, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the driveway. Jack immediately got to work unloading the truck and sorting through the supplies. Lucas stood there for a moment watching him. It was strange, but he didn't feel embarrassed anymore. He didn't feel like he was better than this or like he had outgrown it. He just felt connected to his father, to the work, to the life that had been waiting for him all along. Without thinking, Lucas grabbed a pair of gloves from the truck and walked over to where his father was working. Jack didn't look up at first, but when he saw Lucas standing there, he smiled. You ready? He asked, already reaching for the tools. I'm ready, Lucas said, his voice steady. And just like that, they got to work. It was simple work, hammering in nails, fixing broken boards, sanding down rough edges. But for Lucas, it felt like more than just fixing a shed. It felt like he was fixing something in himself. The more he worked, the more he realized how much he had taken for granted, how much he had missed by focusing on the wrong things. He had always looked for the big moments, the flashy accomplishments, the things that would make people notice him. But now, standing there with his father, fixing something that would go unnoticed by most people, Lucas realized that the small moments, the ones that went unnoticed by the world, were the ones that really mattered. As the evening wore on, the shed began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Jack had taught Lucas that perfection wasn't the point. It was the effort that mattered, the intention behind the work, the care that went into it. And in that moment, Lucas understood. He understood his father's way of life, his quiet strength, and the love that had always been there, even when Lucas had been too blind to see it. When they finally finished, the shed looked much better. It wasn't brand new, but it was sturdy, it was safe, It was a place that could stand the test of time, and as they stepped back to admire their work, Lucas felt a sense of pride he had never experienced before. He looked at his father, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a kid looking up to someone who didn't understand him. He felt like an equal. He felt like he was finally seeing the world and his father for what they truly were. And for the first time, Lucas knew that he wasn't alone. He had someone in his corner who would always have his back no matter what. And that, Lucas realized, was the most important thing of all. The days after that continued to bring change, and while it wasn't always easy, Lucas knew that the path he was on was one he was finally ready to walk. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but for the first time he had the tools to face them. Tools that his father had given him, not in a workshop, but in the quiet moments they shared. As the days stretched into weeks, Lucas found himself adjusting to a new rhythm. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the old habits tried to resurface, moments when the pull of his old life, the one full of wealth and social approval, tempted him to slip back into the person he used to be. But each time he reminded himself of what had happened that night. He remembered how close he had come to losing everything, how much his father had sacrificed for him, and how much he still had to learn. It was a slow transformation, like the gradual change of the seasons. Nothing dramatic, nothing overnight. But it was real, and it was lasting. Jack, too, seemed to notice the difference. He wasn't as worried anymore. He could tell that Lucas was trying even when it was hard. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond that had always been there, but one that had been buried under layers of misunderstanding and pride. And every day it grew stronger. It was a Thursday afternoon when Lucas had his first real test since the change. The school had been planning a fundraising event for the upcoming weekend, a charity auction. The students were tasked with gathering donations from local businesses, and Lucas had been asked to help organize it. It seemed like a simple enough task, but to Lucas it felt like a reminder of how much he had lost touch with his old life. It was the kind of event he had once thrived in, running the show, making deals, getting people to notice him. But now, as he sat at his desk at school, looking over the event details, he couldn't help but feel like an outsider. It wasn't just about the event, though. It was about something deeper, something he wasn't sure how to face. Lucas was starting to realize that the life he had been living before wasn't just a phase or something to outgrow. It had shaped him, but not in the way he had thought. The arrogance, the selfishness, the pride, those were the things he needed to let go of. But the question lingered. Could he really leave it all behind? The doubt gnawed at him as he looked through the list of donors. But just as he was about to get lost in his thoughts, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from his father. It was a simple text, nothing big. Just a reminder that they were going to finish up the work on the shed that afternoon. For a moment, Lucas didn't know what to do. He had responsibilities. His friends expected him to be involved in the event. But something about his father's message made him pause. The thought of working alongside Jack again, of having that quiet, focused time together, felt like exactly what he needed. He knew what he had to do. He put the phone down and texted his friends, telling them he wouldn't be able to help that afternoon. They weren't happy about it, but Lucas didn't care. He had made a promise to himself. He was no longer willing to take his father for granted. When Lucas arrived at home, Jack was already out in the backyard, sorting through the leftover materials from the shed project. His father didn't look up when Lucas approached, but there was a warmth in his posture, a kind of unspoken acknowledgement that said everything was different now. "I'm here," Lucas said quietly. Jack smiled, nodding. "Good, you're just in time. Got a lot of work to finish up." The afternoon stretched out before them, just like it had the first time they worked together on the shed. There was no rush, no need to impress anyone. It was just them, the tools and the work that needed to be done. But this time it felt different. There was no awkwardness between them. No strained silences. They didn't need words to communicate anymore. They just worked. As they continued, Lucas found himself lost in the rhythm of the task. The simple act of sanding down the wooden beams, the feeling of the smooth wood under his hands, it was grounding. It reminded him of how much he had taken for granted, how much he had overlooked. It wasn't the big moments that made life worth living. It was the quiet moments like these, the small acts of care and effort that built something lasting. After a while, Lucas spoke, his voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking, Dad." Jack looked up, pausing his work. "About what?" "About everything. About how I used to think. I thought that the only way to be happy was to have everything. To have the best stuff, the best parties, the most friends. But I've realized it's not like that. It's not about impressing people or having the latest anything. It's about doing something meaningful. It's about real connections. About putting in the effort." Jack's eyes softened, and for a moment Lucas saw a look of pride in them, a look he hadn't seen in a long time. "That's right. It's not about what you have. It's about who you are. It's about how you treat people. The rest of it, well, that's just stuff. The real value is in the work, in the love, and in the effort you put into everything." Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of his father's words settle deep inside him. It wasn't just about changing his habits, it was about changing the way he saw the world, and that wasn't something that happened overnight. It would take time and it would take effort, but Lucas was ready for it now. They finished up the work on the shed as the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. It felt like a quiet victory, the kind that wasn't shouted about or celebrated with applause. It was just the two of them, standing together looking at the work they had done. The shed wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was something they had built together with care and with effort. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Lucas found himself thinking about the charity event again. He thought about how much he had wanted to be the star of the show, to have everyone admire him, to be the one everyone talked about. But now it didn't seem so important. He realized that the real measure of success wasn't in how many people noticed you, but in how you treated those around you, how you made them feel, and in the end, that's what really mattered. The next day, Lucas went back to school with a new sense of purpose. He didn't avoid the event, but he didn't approach it with the same urgency he once would have. Instead, he focused on what he could do to help, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And to his surprise, it felt good. It felt right. When the event finally arrived that weekend, Lucas didn't stand at the front of the room waiting for everyone to admire him. He stayed in the background, quietly doing his part. And when it was over, there were no big cheers, no special recognition. But Lucas didn't mind. He didn't need it anymore. He had learned something far more valuable, that the most meaningful moments weren't the ones filled with applause, but the ones where you gave everything you had without expecting anything in return. Weeks passed and life continued. Lucas still had his moments of doubt, his days where the old parts of him tried to resurface. But he was different now. He knew that change wasn't a single moment. It was a process, and every day was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to put his efforts into something real. One evening, as Lucas was sitting on the porch with Jack, looking out at the quiet evening sky, he realized just how much had changed. He wasn't the same person who had once taken everything for granted. He wasn't the boy who thought he could fix everything with money or status. He was someone new, someone who understood the value of hard work, love, and the quiet strength that came from those things. "I don't know if I ever really thanked you, Dad," Lucas said, his voice sincere. Jack looked at him, his eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to thank me, son. You're doing just fine."